My daughter-in-law shoved me down the porch steps, and I let her think I was too weak to do anything about it. The next morning, I handed her a small gift box. She thought it held the spare key to my house and the money she'd been after for months. She actually laughed and said, "See, I knew you'd come around." Then she lifted the lid. Before I go on, do me a favor and subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're sitting right now. I like knowing who's out there listening. I was repotting the Christmas cactus my late wife had kept alive for 31 years when I heard the car in the driveway. Not Owen's old pickup. Something newer. The engine too smooth, the kind of payment that eats a household alive. I knew before I looked through the kitchen window that it was Bryn behind the wheel, and that my son was in the passenger seat where she liked to keep him. I'm 70 years old. I spent 41 of those years as a high school shop teacher in a town outside Cedar Rapids, and the last 9 of them as a widower. I am not a soft man, and I am not a hard one. I'm the kind who measures twice and cuts once, who keeps receipts in a coffee can, who taught 1,000 kids how to build a birdhouse that wouldn't fall apart in the first storm. I mention all this so you understand I am not a fool, even though for a long stretch there I let myself be treated like one. They came up the walk the way they always did now. Owen first, head a little down, and Bryn behind him with that bright, wide smile she put on like lipstick. My son used to walk into my house and head straight for the fridge, calling out something done just to hear the kitchen echo. That boy was gone. The man on my porch knocked on his own father's door. Dad. He hugged me, quick, careful, like I might break. We were in the neighborhood. Nobody was ever in my neighborhood. I live at the end of a gravel road with 3 other houses and a lot of corn. Come in. I've got coffee on. We can't stay long, Bryn said, already past me, already in my living room, her eyes doing that thing they did where they added up the value of everything they landed on. My wife's piano. The grandfather clock. My own father built in 1958. The good leather chair. I'd watched her count my house before. I knew exactly what it cost me to keep watching. We sat. Owen on the edge of the couch, Bryn settled in the middle of it like she paid for it. I took my chair. "So," Bryn said, leaning forward, hands clasped. "We wanted to talk to you about something real, Walter. I mean, Dad." She never quite landed on what to call me, and I'd stopped offering. Owen and we found this opportunity. A franchise. Smoothie and Acai Place, downtown, prime corner. It's a sure thing. The numbers are unbelievable. I looked at my son. "What do you think of it, Owen?" He opened his mouth. Bryn answered. "We've talked it to death. It's the right move. We just need the startup capital, and we're golden." "How much?" She didn't even slow down. 60,000. I let that sit in the room. Outside, a tractor was working the field across the road, the diesel grinding low and steady, the most honest sound I knew. 60,000, I said. "Owen, didn't I give you 11,000 2 years ago for the food truck?" "Dad. And 9 before that for the dropshipping thing. And 5 for the cryptocurrency. That's $25,000, son. None of it ever came back, and that's all right. You're my boy. I never asked for it. But you're sitting here in my living room asking me for 60 more. "Those were learning experiences," Bryn said. Her voice had gone tight at the edges. "This is different. This is a proven model." "The answer's no. I wish you could have seen the temperature change in that room." Bryn's smile didn't drop so much as freeze, like a pond skinning over in November. She stood up. She started pacing in front of my wife's piano. And she started talking fast about how I had more money than I'd ever spend, how I was selfish, how I'd rather rot alone in my big empty house than help my own family, how Owen had given me grandchildren, and what had I ever given back. I sat there and took it because I'd taken it before. But then she said the thing. "Honestly, it's no wonder Margaret got sick living with a man like you." My wife's name was Margaret. She died of pancreatic cancer in March of 2016. And there is not a morning I don't reach across the bed for her before I remember. I stood up. I don't even know what I meant to do. Probably just ask them to leave. But I'd barely gotten to my feet when Bryn turned and put both hands flat on my chest and shoved. I'm 70. My balance isn't what it was. I went backward into the doorframe, and then through the screen door, and then down the 3 porch steps, and I landed on the gravel on my hip and my elbow. And for a second, the grey sky went white. I heard Owen yell. I heard Bryn say, fast and loud. He came at me. You saw it. He came at me. I had to defend myself. I lay there in the gravel. My hip was screaming. My elbow was bleeding through my flannel. And my son, my boy, stood at the top of those steps and looked down at me, and I watched him choose. I watched it happen on his face. He looked at his wife and he looked at his father in the dirt and he said quietly, "Dad, why'd you have to push her like that?" I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. They left. The newer than they could afford car backed out of my drive, and Bryn was already on her phone, and I lay in the gravel until I was sure they were gone before I let myself make a sound. It took me 11 minutes to get up. I timed it because timing things keeps me calm. I sat at my kitchen table with a bag of frozen peas on my elbow and I shook, not from the fall, from the rest of it, from my son's face. And then, somewhere in the shaking, my eye landed on the little black dome up in the corner of my porch ceiling. The security camera, the one I'd installed myself with my own hands 18 months ago, after somebody'd been stealing packages off porches all down the county road. There were 4 of them. 1 on the porch, 1 over the driveway, 2 inside in the living room and over the back door, because the insurance discount required interior coverage, and I'm a man who reads the fine print. Every one of them recorded to a hard drive in my basement. Every word Bryn said in my living room. Every word Owen didn't say. The shove, the fall, all of it. I sat there a long time. Then I went down to the basement, slow, holding the rail, and I pulled the footage onto a flash drive, and I watched it on my workbench computer. I watched my daughter-in-law put her hands on my chest. I watched myself go through the door. I watched my son decide. Now here's the part where most people think I should have called the police that night. I didn't. I'll tell you why. Because 41 years of teaching taught me that you don't react when you're angry. You wait until you're right. So the next morning I drove to a lawyer. Her name was Delphine Okafor, and her office was above a pharmacy in town, and she'd handled my wife's estate, and she was the smartest person I knew. She watched the footage twice without a word. Then she took off her glasses. "Walter, this is an assault. Caught clean on camera. You could press charges today. I want to. Then there's something you need to understand first." She set the glasses down. "Once this starts, it doesn't stop where you pointed. Your son is on that video saying you pushed her. He's covering for her. If we go forward, he's a witness. And either he tells the truth or he commits a crime to protect her. You ready for that?" I thought about my boy's face at the top of the steps. "He already chose," I said. "I'm just making him do it where it counts." She nodded slow. "Then don't talk to either of them. Not a word. No texts, no calls. Whatever they send you, you screenshot it and you send it to me, and you say nothing. Can you do that?" I said I could. I drove home. My phone had been buzzing the whole way. 40-some texts from Owen, getting more frantic the longer I went quiet. "Dad, call me." "Dad, we need to talk." "Dad, Bryn is really upset. She's saying you scared her. You have to make this right." "Dad, please." I screenshotted everyone. I said nothing. That afternoon I did one thing my lawyer wouldn't have liked. "I want to be honest with you, because the man telling this story isn't a saint." I sat in my kitchen with that gift box on the table, and I thought about how good it would feel. I'd had it ready since the morning. A little white box with a ribbon, the kind you'd put cufflinks in. Inside it, I'd put a single flash drive and a printed note. And I drove it to their house myself, which Delphine absolutely told me not to do. Bryn answered the door. The smile came on like a porch light. "Walter, I knew you'd see sense." She looked at the box. Is this? Owen, your dad's here. He brought something. She took it out of my hand. Is the key in here? And the... She had the lid off before I could have stopped her. She was already laughing. See? I knew you'd come around. Then she saw the flash drive, and the note which read, "Everything on this is also with my attorney and the Lynn County Sheriff, W. I have spent my life watching faces. I directed school plays for a decade on top of the shop classes, and I know what a face does when the floor drops out from under it." Bryn's face did that. The laugh died in her throat. Owen came up behind her and looked over her shoulder and went the color of old putty. "You can't," she said. "Walter, this is insane. This is a family matter. You shoved a 70-year-old man down a flight of stairs," I said. "On camera. In my own house. And my son told me I did it to myself." I looked at Owen when I said the last part. He couldn't hold my eyes. "It's not a family matter anymore. It's a court matter. See you there." I turned and walked to my truck. I shouldn't have gone. The drive home. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and I knew I'd just handed her time to think, to scheme, to get ahead of it. Delphine confirmed it the next morning in 2 sentences. "You told her exactly what we have, and exactly who has it. Walter, you gave away the whole hand." She sighed. "But it's done. We adapt." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that I'd just kicked over a much bigger rock than the one in my own yard. 3 days later, my phone rang from a number I didn't know. I almost let it go. A man's voice, careful, maybe shifty. "Is this Walter, Owen's father?" I said it was. "My name's Desmond Fry." "You don't know me. I used to be in business with your son's wife before she was your son's wife. I heard from a mutual friend you've got trouble with her. I think we should talk, and I think you'll want to bring a lawyer." We met at a coffee shop off the interstate. Desmond was a tidy man with tired eyes who kept his hands wrapped around his cup like he was cold. He slid a folder across the table before he said much of anything. Inside were partnership papers. A wellness studio, 2017, dissolved 2019. And a settlement agreement. And photographs. A man's forearm in a cast. A police report that went nowhere. "We opened a yoga and juice place together," Desmond said. "Her idea, my money, 40,000 to start. Things were good for about a year. Then money started disappearing into consulting fees I never approved. When I confronted her in the back office, she swung a register drawer at my arm, broke it in 2 places. He turned the photos so I could see better. She told everyone I tripped over a yoga mat. Her word against mine, no cameras. I had a baby coming. I took the settlement, signed the NDA, and I've hated myself for it ever since, because I knew she'd do it to somebody else." I sat there with my coffee going cold. "Why come to me now?" "Because you got it on video," he said. "The thing none of us ever had. You can actually put a wall in front of her. And I'd rather break an NDA and get sued than read about her hurting somebody worse someday." He paused. "There's a criminal exception, by the way. I can't talk about the civil settlement, but I can testify about an assault to law enforcement. My new lawyer made sure I knew that." "How many others?" I asked. The question came out of me before I'd decided to ask it. He looked at his cup. "That I know of for sure. You'd be the 3rd. There was a fella in Davenport, ran a gym, lost his shirt, and I don't know for certain, but I heard there was money she took off an old woman a few years back. Told her a story about a sick child to do it. That one I never confirmed." A sick child. Something cold moved through me. Slow, because Owen and Bryn had a little girl, my granddaughter Pearl, 6 years old, gap-toothed and perfect. And I hadn't been allowed to see her in almost a year. They always had a reason. Pearl had a cold. Pearl had a recital. Pearl had a recital. Pearl had a recital, and I, fool that I am, had believed every reason and grieved quietly and sent birthday checks I never knew if she got. I drove home and I sat with that. And then I started making calls of my own. It took me 2 weeks. I'm a methodical man and I had nothing but time and rage to spend. The fella in Davenport was real. His name was Curtis, and he'd lost about 30,000 and his marriage, and he talked for an hour without me asking a single question. But it was the old woman that broke me. Her name was Hazel Mooney, and she lived in a senior community in Dubuque, and Desmond's mutual friend had been her granddaughter, who'd been at a baby shower 3 years back where Bryn had mentioned, in passing, an old man near Cedar Rapids who'd lost his wife. Connecting threads. I called Hazel, and she was sharp as a tack and very, very tired. "Oh, I remember her," Hazel said. "Lovely girl," I thought. She told me her husband's father, "That'd be you, dear. I'm so sorry," had a granddaughter who was very sick. Some blood condition. Needed treatment the insurance wouldn't pay. She showed me letters from a hospital, on real letterhead. I gave her $12,000. I'm a retired bookkeeper. I do not make mistakes with money, but those letters were perfect. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "Mrs. Mooney, my granddaughter has never been sick a day in her life." There was a long silence on the line. "I was afraid you'd say that," she said softly. "I've wondered for 3 years. Here's the part I have not been able to put down since. The hospital letters Bryn forged were dated the spring of 2016. The exact same spring my Margaret was dying, while my wife was wasting away in a bed in our front room, weighing 80 pounds, holding my hand and apologizing to me for leaving. Her son's girlfriend was 3 counties over telling a stranger that our family had a sick child and pocketing $12,000. Using the idea of a dying child to a woman whose real grief was sitting in my front room. I had to pull off the road. I sat in a gas station lot, and I put my forehead on the steering wheel, and I cried the way I hadn't let myself cry at the funeral. Because at the funeral I'd had to be strong for Owen, who was 24 and broken, who I'd held on the church steps, who had wept into my shoulder and said, "I don't know how to do this without her, Dad." That boy. That same boy had stood at the top of my porch steps and watched his wife knock me into the dirt and called it my fault. I want to tell you I felt only rage. I didn't. Mostly I felt sorrow, the bottomless kind. Because somewhere in those 9 years she had taken my son a piece at a time, and I'd been so deep in my own grief, I never saw the bridge go up between us. I brought it all to Delphine. The folder from Desmond. Curtis' statement. Hazel's forged letters, which her granddaughter still had. Delphine spread it across her desk and was quiet a long time. "Walter," she said finally, "your assault case was strong on its own. This is something else. This is a pattern. Patterns are very hard to defend against." She looked up. "But I have to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Hazel and Curtis and Desmond. That's fraud. That's older. Some of it's civil. The criminal statute may have run on parts of it. Your assault is the clean, current, provable thing. Are you going after the slap, or are you going after her?" I thought about Margaret's hand in mine in March of 2016. "Both," I said. "But I'll settle for the truth coming out." So we built it. Delphine connected Hazel and Curtis with the DA's office, where a young prosecutor named Imani Vasquez got the kind of look in her eye that good prosecutors get. The assault charge had the video. The fraud gave it weight. And then there was the matter of my son. Owen called me 11 days before the trial. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was small, "Dad, there's a guy named Desmond who called Bryn's old phone, and a woman in Dubuque left a message. Bryn deleted them, but I saw the screen." A breath. "Dad, what did she do? What did she actually do?" I told him. Not cruelly. Just the truth, all of it, the way Margaret would have wanted. The yoga studio. Curtis. The cast on Desmond's arm, and then I told him about Hazel, and the forged hospital letters, and the date on them. The spring his mother died. The sound he made, I will hear until I'm in the ground. It wasn't crying exactly. It was a sound of a man understanding, all at once, the size of the thing he'd been standing inside of. She told me Pearl's school stuff, the recitals, why we couldn't bring her around, he said. She said you'd gotten strange after Mum. Said you scared her. I believed. Dad, I believed her over you. His voice broke clean in half. Why did I believe her over you? Because she's good at it, I said. Because grief makes a man easy to steer. I know. I was easy to steer, too. He came over that night for the first time in a year. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd held the frozen peas to my elbow. And he was 33 years old, and he cried like he was 9. And I'll tell you something I didn't expect. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt my wife in the room. I felt her hand on the back of my neck the way she used to do it. The trial was in October in the Lynn County Courthouse, a building I'd voted in for 50 years. Smaller room than you'd think. The video played first on a screen with the lights down. I watched the jury, watched my daughter-in-law put her hands on my chest. I watched a woman in the second row press her fingers to her mouth. Then the medical records. Then Desmond, calm and sad, lifting his sleeve to show where the bone had set wrong. Then Curtis. Then Hazel Mooney, 81 years old, who stood up straight as a fence post and told the court about a sick child who never existed and the spring she'd been lied to. When Imani asked her why she'd come all this way to testify, Hazel said, "Because I'm too old to be afraid anymore, and because somebody's wife died the same month, thinking her family had a sick baby, and that was a real woman's last spring, and it should not have been spent in somebody else's lie." I had to look at the floor. Bryn's lawyer fought hard. They tried to say I'd come at her, that I was a bitter old man rewriting a fall, and then the prosecutor stood and said, "The people call Owen." She hadn't told me. My son walked to the stand in a suit that didn't fit because he'd lost weight, and he put his hand on the book, and Bryn made a sound from her table, low like a kettle. "You were present on the porch the day in question." I was. "Did your father push your wife?" The room held its breath. I held mine. He looked at me, and then he looked at his wife, and then he looked at the jury, and he said clear, "No, he did not. She pushed him. He went down the steps. I watched it happen. And I lied about it because I was afraid of her, and because I was a coward, and I have never been more ashamed of anything in my life." Bryn was on her feet shouting before the gavel came down. They removed her from the room. The doors closed on her voice the way the screen door had closed behind me when I went through it. She was convicted of assault. The fraud opened into its own separate investigation that's still grinding through the courts as I tell you this. The sentence was 90 days, suspended anger management, a restraining order, and restitution I never expected to see. I didn't care about the money. I never had. I cared that on a recording somewhere, and in a courtroom, and in front of a jury of people from my own county, the truth got said out loud. Owen and Bryn are divorcing. He's living in a rental in town and he's a wreck, and he's going to be all right, which are both true at the same time, the way most true things are. He brought Pearl out to the farm last Sunday. She didn't remember me. 6 years old, she looked up at this old stranger by the cactus, and Owen knelt down and said, "Pearl, this is Grandpa. He builds birdhouses. You want to build one?" She did. We did. It's hanging off the porch right now, crooked, perfect, and Wren's already found it. People ask me. Curtis asks me. Desmond asks me. My own self asks me at 2 in the morning, was it worth it? Tearing my son's marriage down to the studs, dragging an 81-year-old woman into a courtroom. Putting my family's worst spring on a screen for strangers. Here's the only answer I've got. Margaret died thinking, in some small back room of her mind, that something might be wrong with a grandchild she'd never meet. That fear got counted by someone else's lie, and my wife carried a little of it into the ground. I can't take that back, but I could stop the lie from spreading 1 inch further than it already had. And I did. The cactus is blooming again this year. Margaret would have liked the wren. If this story meant something to you, Give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, would you have handed over that box? I read every one. I've had a lot of quiet mornings since that trial to turn this thing over in my hands. And what I keep coming back to is how slow it all was. Nothing happened overnight. Bryn didn't shove me down those steps out of nowhere. It was years of small surrenders, mine included. Every check I wrote to Owen without a real conversation. Every reason I swallowed about why I couldn't see Pearl. Every lie I let stand because it was easier than the fight. You teach high school shop for 41 years. You learn that a beam doesn't fail all at once. It fails at the spot you stopped inspecting. I stopped inspecting my own family, and the rot set in right where I wasn't looking. People hear this story and they want to make me the hero who finally swung the hammer. I'm not. The hammer was always there. 4 cameras, a hard drive in the basement, a lawyer I trusted. What took me so long wasn't the means. It was finding the spine to use them against people I loved. That's the part nobody warns you about. Standing up to a stranger is easy. Standing up to your own son's wife, knowing it'll cost you the boy himself for a while, that takes something you have to build slow, the way you build everything that holds weight. I think about 3 things now. The 3 things I'd hand any man my age who's sitting in a quiet house letting himself be steered. First, keep your sense of right and wrong sharper than your fear of conflict. The day I stopped asking whether something was true and started asking whether it was easier, I handed my family to someone who counted my furniture. Second, use your head before you use your heart. I gave away my whole hand the day I drove that box over there myself, because I wanted the satisfaction more than I wanted the win. Delphine had to clean up after me, and Margaret would have smacked my arm and told me the same. Third, and this is the hard one, you have to be willing to bear the cost of doing right even when it breaks something you can't fix. Hazel Mooney was 81 and tired and afraid, and she stood up in that courtroom anyway, because she decided her last years would not be spent protecting a liar. That old woman taught me more about courage than any man I ever met. Cause and effect. Bryn lied for years and got rewarded for it, so she lied bigger. I stayed silent for years and got peace for it, so I stayed silent longer. Both of those bills came due in the same gravel driveway on the same grey afternoon. The only thing I did right, finally, was refuse to let the lie spread 1 inch past where it had already gone. The cactus is blooming, the wrens still in the birdhouse, and Pearl's coming Sunday. That's the whole reward, and it's enough.